My dad invited my brother to his 60th birthday but excluded me because I look like my mother. His face was priceless when I told him that I am removing him from my life. I found out through my cousin's Instagram story, seeing the invitation on her counter. Harold's 60th family celebration, with the date, time, and his house address. My brother Tom called me that night pretending to check in about work stuff. 20 minutes of small talk before he casually mentioned he had a thing on Saturday. What thing? I asked. Just some dinner. He knew. He knew and was lying to me. Is it Dad's birthday party? Silence. Then, how did you find out? So it's true. He invited everyone except me. Maybe he just hasn't gotten around to inviting you yet. Tom, the party is in 4 days. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this. You're already in the middle. You're going to a party I'm not invited to. He sighed. What do you want me to do? Not go? I want you to ask him why his daughter isn't invited. You know why. Everyone knew why. I looked like my mother. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same small nose. The mirror showed me her face every morning. The face of the woman who destroyed our family. I drove to my dad's house that Thursday. He was in the garage fixing something that probably didn't need fixing. Always finding things to do when he wanted to avoid something. Hey, Dad. He looked up, his face tightening the way it always did when he saw me. Like I was a bill he didn't want to pay. What are you doing here? Can't I visit my father? I'm busy. He turned back to his workbench. Are you having a party Saturday? His shoulders stiffened. Who told you? Does it matter? Why wasn't I invited? He finally turned around, looked right at me with those cold eyes. You know why? No, I don't. Every time I look at you, I see her. Same eyes, same nose, same lying face. My mother cheated on him 15 years ago. I was 12. Tom was 14. She left with the other man, moved to Arizona, started a new family. We hadn't seen her since. I'm not her, I said. I'm your daughter. I stayed. I chose you. Doesn't matter. You look just like her, sound like her, even stand like her. That's not my fault. I don't care whose fault it is. I can't have you there. Not for my birthday. Not with everyone watching, thinking about what she did. But Tom looks like her too. We're siblings. We have the same mother. Tom looks like me. Acts like me. You're all her. Every gesture, every laugh, everything. He went back to his tools. Please leave. Dad, I've been here. Every Father's Day. Every Christmas. Even when you barely acknowledged me. I said leave. I sat in my car for an hour before driving home, thinking about all the times he'd looked through me like I was transparent. All the school events where he'd cheer for Tom and barely clap for me. The driving lessons he gave Tom but not me, saying I could figure it out myself. Saturday came. I stayed home, ordered pizza, watched TV, tried not to think about what was happening at his house. Tom texted me pictures from the party. Everyone was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Even my grandmother, who could barely travel anymore, had made the trip from Florida. In every photo, there was an empty space where I should have been. Standing next to Tom, hugging my grandmother, laughing with my cousins. But I was home, alone, because my face was wrong. Tom called me Sunday morning. It was weird without you. Was it? But you still went. You still chose his side. There aren't sides. He's our father. He's your father. Apparently, I'm just a reminder of his ex-wife. That's not fair. Fair? He excluded me from a family party because of my genetics. Tell me what's fair about that. Silence. He's hurting, Tom finally said. He's been hurting for 15 years. So have I. The difference is I didn't abandon my child over it. Monday, I went back to his house. This time I didn't knock. Used my key, the one he forgot I had. He was at the kitchen table going through birthday cards. Probably thank you notes he'd never send. Get out, he said without looking up. No. I sat across from him. You need to hear this. She did it to all of us. Tom and I lost our mother, but I also lost my father. He's sitting right here, but he's been gone since I was 12. And you know what the worst part is? I kept trying. Kept showing up. Kept hoping one day you'd see me instead of her. I'm done trying to earn something that should be free. Tom can have you all to himself. Where are you going? I smile and I felt my head spinning. Before everything went black, I see his shocked face and he's running towards me. I woke up on the kitchen floor with Harold's face hovering over mine, his hands shaking as he touched my shoulder. Sirens wailed outside, getting louder, and I realized he must have called 911 while I was out. The paramedics came through the front door seconds later, a woman with short blonde hair and a man with a beard, both carrying equipment bags. Harold scrambled back to give them room, his face white and scared in a way I'd never seen before. The female paramedic knelt beside me, pressing 2 fingers against my wrist while asking my name and if I knew where I was. I managed to answer, my voice coming out weak and scratchy. She checked my eyes with a small flashlight, asked me to follow her finger, then wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm. The male paramedic set up equipment while Harold stood against the counter, wringing his hands and explaining that we'd been arguing and I just collapsed. The female paramedic asked Harold about my medical history, any medications I took, known conditions, and he stumbled through answers, admitting he didn't actually know most of it. She glanced at him with raised eyebrows, then back at me, clearly picking up on the tension in the room. My blood pressure reading made her frown, and she told her partner they needed to transport me. They brought in a stretcher, helped me onto it, and secured straps across my chest and legs. Harold followed them to the ambulance, asking if he could ride along, and the male paramedic hesitated before nodding. They loaded me into the back, the female paramedic climbing in with me while Harold took a seat on the side bench. She hooked me up to a heart monitor that beeped steadily, placed an oxygen mask over my face, and started asking questions about chest pain and dizziness. I told her I'd felt dizzy before I passed out, but no chest pain, just overwhelming exhaustion. Harold sat across from me looking pale and shaken, his hands gripping his knees. The paramedic asked more questions, writing notes on a tablet, and I watched Harold reach toward me like he wanted to take my hand. His arm extended halfway across the space between us, fingers outstretched, then stopped. He held that position for several seconds, his hand just hanging there in the air, before pulling it back and pressing both palms against his thighs. The ambulance turned corners, the siren cutting through traffic, and neither of us spoke. We arrived at the emergency room and they wheeled me through automatic doors into a bright hallway that smelled like antiseptic and floor cleaner. A nurse directed them to a room with a curtain partition, and they transferred me from the stretcher to a hospital bed. Harold followed but stayed near the doorway, looking lost and uncomfortable. A doctor came in minutes later, a tall man with gray hair and glasses who introduced himself as Dr. Ferguson. He reviewed the paramedic's notes, then examined me, checking my pulse, looking in my eyes, listening to my heart and lungs. He asked pointed questions about what led to the collapse, whether I'd eaten today, how much water I'd had, and about recent stress in my life. His eyes kept moving between me and Harold, clearly sensing something wrong in the dynamic. Harold sat down in a corner chair, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else, saying nothing. Dr. Ferguson explained that I'd had a severe stress-induced episode combined with dehydration and low blood sugar, a perfect storm that caused my body to shut down. He said they needed to run some tests and keep me for observation. A nurse came in with an IV kit, cleaning a spot on my arm and sliding the needle in with practiced efficiency. She taped it down, hung a bag of fluids on a pole, and adjusted the drip rate. She told me I'd need to stay for at least 4 hours while they monitored me and got fluids into my system. I closed my eyes, exhausted from everything, and heard footsteps approaching fast. Tom's voice cut through the quiet, asking what happened, and I opened my eyes to see him standing at my bedside still wearing his dress shirt from the party. He looked between me and Harold, his face tight with worry. Harold finally spoke up, his voice rough, saying I'd collapsed at his house. Tom's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing as he looked at our father, clearly knowing there was more to the story than that simple statement. Tom pulled Harold toward the door, gesturing for him to step into the hallway, and I could hear their voices rising even through the closed door. Tom demanded to know what was said before I collapsed, his tone sharp and angry. Harold's defensive response carried clearly, insisting I'd just shown up and started accusing him of things. Tom's voice got louder, telling Harold that excluding me from the party was cruel, and everyone there felt uncomfortable about my absence. Their argument continued, words blurring together, until footsteps approached, and Luna appeared in the doorway holding my phone charger and a bag from my apartment. She looked through the door window at Harold, then back at Tom, asking if he was the reason I was here. Tom nodded and Luna's jaw tightened, but she came straight to my bedside instead of engaging with the hallway drama. She asked what I needed and whether I wanted Harold to leave, her voice gentle but her eyes hard. I told her I didn't have the energy to deal with Harold right now, my voice cracking on the words. Luna walked to the door and opened it, asking Harold politely but firmly to go home and let me rest. Harold looked like he wanted to argue, his mouth opening then closing, but Tom backed Luna up, saying Dad had done enough damage for one day. Harold's shoulders slumped and he walked away down the hospital corridor, looking smaller somehow, his back hunched like he'd aged 10 years. Dr. Ferguson returned with a tablet displaying test results, his expression serious as he explained that I was severely stressed, malnourished from not eating properly, and my blood pressure was dangerously elevated for someone my age. He asked directly if I was in a safe living situation, and whether the family conflict that brought me here was ongoing. The question broke something in me and I started crying, tears running down my face as I explained about the birthday party and being excluded because I looked like my mother. Dr. Ferguson's expression shifted from clinical to genuinely sympathetic as he listened, his professional mask slipping to show actual concern. He recommended I follow up with both my regular physician and a therapist, explaining that chronic stress was literally making me sick. He said the collapse was my body's way of forcing me to stop and address what I'd been enduring. Tom sat beside my bed looking guilty, his hand hovering near mine before finally taking it. He admitted he should have confronted Dad years ago instead of taking the path of least resistance, his voice thick with regret. Luna stood on my other side, one hand on my shoulder, steady and solid. The door opened again, and Gail walked in still wearing her party dress, her face tight with anger I'd never seen directed at her own son before. She marched straight to my bedside and took my free hand, her grip firm and warm. She apologized for not speaking up sooner about Harold's treatment of me, her voice shaking with emotion. Tom looked surprised by her intensity, his eyebrows rising. Gail told us both that she'd been watching this dysfunction for years, and her silence made her complicit, that she should have intervened long ago instead of hoping Harold would eventually come to his senses on his own. Gail squeezes my hand tighter and her mouth sets in a hard line like she's made a decision. She tells me she confronted Harold at the party after I wasn't there, walked right up to him in front of everyone and asked why his daughter was excluded from a family celebration. Harold apparently gave her the same excuse about me looking like my mother, and Gail says she told him that was the most pathetic thing she'd ever heard from her own son. Her voice shakes when she describes it, how several cousins and aunts stopped talking to listen, how Harold's face went red and he tried to walk away but she followed him. That's why Celine and others have been texting me worried messages, because they heard the whole thing and realized I'd been excluded. Gail says some of them looked ashamed, like they knew it was wrong but went along with it anyway. She tells me she's staying in town for a few more days whether Harold likes it or not, that she's not leaving until she's had a proper conversation with him about his behavior. Tom nods from his chair, looking relieved that someone finally said something to Dad's face instead of just feeling uncomfortable in silence. Dr. Ferguson comes back around 6 that evening with discharge papers and a serious expression. He goes through instructions about rest, eating properly, following up with my regular doctor within 3 days. He hands me referral information and tells me my body is sending clear signals that I can't ignore anymore. The nurse removes my IV and gives me a printed sheet about stress management that feels useless, but I take it anyway. Tom immediately says I'm staying at his apartment, not going home alone, and Luna agrees before I can argue. She's already texted herself my apartment key code so she can bring me clothes and stuff I need. Gail announces she's extending her hotel stay, making it clear with her tone that this isn't up for discussion. She's staying until Harold understands what he's done. The nurse wheels me out in a wheelchair even though I can walk, hospital policy apparently, and Tom brings his car around to the pickup area. Luna follows in her car so she can go get my things. The evening air feels cold after being in the hospital all day, and I realize I'm still wearing the same clothes I collapsed in. Tom's apartment is smaller than mine, a one-bedroom with a couch that's seen better days and a kitchen that barely fits 2 people. He hovers while I sit on the couch, asking what I want to eat, if I'm comfortable, whether I need anything. Luna arrives with a bag of my clothes, toiletries, phone charger, the basics. She must have moved fast because she's only been gone 20 minutes. Tom orders Thai food from the place down the street and insists I eat something substantial. When it arrives, I force myself to eat pad thai even though my stomach feels tight. Tom sits across from me, apologizing repeatedly for attending the party, for not pushing back harder against Dad's decision to exclude me. He says he should have boycotted in solidarity, should have made a statement by refusing to go. I tell him I'm not angry at him, but I am hurt that he chose to go instead of standing with me. The words come out flat and tired. Tom's face crumples, and he admits he was scared of losing his relationship with Dad too, scared of being the one Dad rejected if he took my side. He says he realizes now how cowardly that was, choosing the easier path while I dealt with the rejection alone. I don't argue with him because he's right and we both know it. Luna stays over that first night, taking Tom's couch while I get his bed and he uses a sleeping bag on the floor. He offers me the bedroom without hesitation, won't hear any argument about it. We stay up late, me in the bedroom doorway, Luna on the couch, Tom on the floor, talking about the years of rejection I endured. I find myself describing moments I haven't thought about in years, like the time I made honor roll in 8th grade, and Harold barely glanced at my report card before going back to watching TV with Tom. Or my high school graduation when he took one photo of me and 40 of Tom, even though we graduated the same year. Luna listens without interrupting, her face getting harder with each story. She finally says I've been living in survival mode, constantly trying to prove I deserve basic parental affection that should have been freely given. The words hit something in my chest, and I feel tears starting again. Tom sits up in his sleeping bag and says he never fully understood how bad it was, that from his perspective, Dad was just stricter with me, not completely rejecting me. I explain the difference between strict and absent, between high expectations and emotional abandonment. We talk until almost 2 a.m. before exhaustion finally wins. The next morning, Tom's phone starts ringing around 8. He's in the kitchen making coffee and I hear him decline the call. It rings again. And again. He finally puts it on silent and brings me coffee in bed, looking stressed. Around 9, a text comes through loud enough that I hear the buzz from the other room. Tom reads it aloud from the doorway, his voice flat. Harold wants to know if I'm okay, needs to know I'm all right. Tom types back that I'm alive and recovering, but Dad needs to give me space right now. Another text comes through within seconds asking when Harold can see me. Tom looks at me and I shake my head. He texts back that it's my decision to make, not Harold's. The phone goes quiet after that and Tom sets it face down on the counter like he can't deal with looking at it anymore. Luna makes breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and I eat because she's watching me with that expression that means she won't take no for an answer. Around noon, there's a knock on Tom's door and Celine is standing there with flowers, white daisies and a cheap grocery store bouquet. She looks like she's been crying, her eyes red and puffy. Tom lets her in and she comes straight to me on the couch, setting the flowers down and apologizing for posting the party invitation where I could see it. She says she didn't realize I wasn't invited until Gail made that scene at the party. The words tumble out fast like she's been practicing them. Celine tells me she felt sick knowing I found out through social media, through her post specifically. She admits that several cousins talked about how wrong it was during the party, standing in small groups whispering about Harold's cruelty, but no one actually left in protest. She says she regrets that now, wishes someone had walked out and made a real statement instead of just feeling uncomfortable while eating cake. I thank her for coming and tell her I don't blame her for the Instagram post. She cries a little and hugs me before leaving, promising to check in later. I spend the next few days at Tom's place sleeping more than I have in months. Luna takes time off work to stay with me, setting up camp on Tom's couch with her laptop and working remotely when she needs to. We have long conversations about family trauma, about the difference between forgiveness and letting people continue to hurt you. She talks about boundaries and self-protection in a way that makes sense, like she's thought about this a lot. Luna finally tells me she cut off her own toxic parent 3 years ago, her father who used to criticize everything she did and make her feel worthless. She says she hasn't regretted choosing her mental health over a destructive relationship, that the relief of not constantly bracing for his judgment was worth the guilt and grief. I ask if she ever misses him, and she says sometimes, but she misses the father she wished she had, not the one who actually existed. The distinction feels important, and I write it down in my phone notes so I don't forget. Gail calls on the 3rd day and asks if she can visit. She shows up an hour later with homemade soup in a container, chicken and rice that smells like comfort. Tom heats it up while Gail sits next to me and talks honestly about Harold's behavior. She tells me Harold was devastated when my mother left, completely broken by the betrayal, but his choice to punish me for her actions is inexcusable. Gail says she's ashamed she didn't intervene more forcefully years ago, that she watched him reject me and told herself he just needed time to heal. She admits she enabled his behavior by staying silent, by not calling him out every single time he treated me like I was invisible. Gail's voice cracks when she says watching him reject his own daughter has been one of the most painful experiences of her life, that she failed both of us by hoping he'd eventually come around on his own. Gail keeps talking, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea Tom made her. She reveals she's been in therapy herself for the past year, working through her own guilt about enabling Harold's treatment of me by staying silent. She explains that she thought giving him space to grieve would eventually lead to healing, but instead he calcified his pain into permanent rejection. The word calcified sticks with me because it's exactly right, like his hurt turned to stone and trapped me underneath it. Gail says she's done protecting Harold from the consequences of his choices, that she told him yesterday his relationship with her depends on him getting help and making genuine amends to me. She's not asking him, she's telling him. Her face is set in that same hard line from the hospital, and I believe her. Tom looks surprised by her intensity, like he's seeing his grandmother differently than he ever has before. Tom drives me to my follow-up appointment with my regular doctor on Thursday morning, 3 days after the collapse like doctor. Ferguson ordered. The doctor reviews the ER report carefully, asking detailed questions about my stress levels, eating habits, sleep patterns. She's blunt in a way I appreciate, telling me I'm showing signs of chronic stress disorder, and if I don't make major changes, I'm at risk for serious health problems. She lists potential consequences, heart problems and digestive issues and immune system breakdown, things that sound scary enough to take seriously. The doctor refers me to a therapist who specializes in family trauma, writing down a name and number on her prescription pad. She also writes a note recommending I take medical leave from work for 2 weeks, saying my body needs time to recover, and I need space to address what's been making me sick. I take the note feeling both relieved and anxious about telling my boss. Tom drives me back to his apartment in silence, both of us processing what the doctor said about my health being in actual danger from the stress Harold has caused. 2 days later, Tom drives me back to my own apartment and helps me carry in the bags Luna packed for me at his place. I unlock my door and the first thing I see is my fridge covered in bright sticky notes, Luna's handwriting on everyone. "You've got this," on the orange juice. "Proud of you," on the yogurt container. "One day at a time," on the milk. She stocked everything with easy meals, pre-made salads and sandwich stuff, and frozen dinners that just need heating up. Tom puts my bags in the bedroom and asks 3 times if I'm sure I'm okay being alone before he finally leaves. The apartment feels different now, quieter in a way that makes my chest tight. I put away the groceries Luna bought and find more notes tucked everywhere, in the silverware drawer and taped to the bathroom mirror and stuck to my laptop. I make it through unpacking and eating some crackers before I start crying at my kitchen table for no specific reason, except everything. The tears come in waves over the next 2 days, hitting me while I'm folding laundry or watching TV or brushing my teeth. I realize I've been mourning my father's love for 15 years while he was still alive and living 20 minutes away, and somehow that's worse than if he'd actually died because at least then I could have blamed fate instead of his choice. Luna comes by every evening to check on me and brings more food even though the fridge is already full. She sits with me through the crying and doesn't try to fix anything, just hands me tissues and reminds me that grief is supposed to hurt this much. 3 days after coming home, I drive to the address doctor Brooks's office gave me for my first therapy appointment. The building is plain brick with a small parking lot, and I sit in my car for 10 minutes before going inside, because walking through that door feels like admitting I need help. I can't give myself. The waiting room has uncomfortable chairs and magazines nobody actually reads, and a white noise machine that's supposed to make you feel private, but just makes everything feel muffled. Dr. Brooks comes out exactly on time, a woman maybe 50 with gray hair and kind eyes that don't look sorry for me, which I appreciate. Her office has a couch, but I choose the chair because the couch feels too much like TV therapy. She asks me to tell her what brought me here, and I start with the birthday party, then the collapse, then realize I need to go back further to explain why it mattered so much. I talk for probably 30 minutes straight, telling her about being 12 and watching my mother leave, about the driving lessons Harold gave Tom but not me, about every Father's Day where I tried so hard and got so little back. Dr. Brooks listens without interrupting and takes a few notes, but mostly just watches my face like she's reading something written there. When I finally stop talking, she's quiet for a minute before asking what I want from my relationship with Harold going forward. The question catches me off guard because I realize I don't actually know anymore. What I wanted was for him to love me, and he's made it clear that's not going to happen the way I need it to. I tell her this, and my voice cracks on the word love because saying it out loud makes it more real. Dr. Brooks leans forward slightly and explains something about accepting reality versus accepting mistreatment. She says I can acknowledge Harold's limitations, that he's damaged by what my mother did and probably always will be, while still protecting myself from his rejection. She asks me to think about what a relationship with him might look like if I stopped trying to earn his love and instead set clear boundaries about respectful treatment. The idea makes something loosen in my chest and tighten at the same time, liberation and terror mixed together. Liberation because it means I can stop performing, stop trying so hard, stop waiting for him to suddenly see me. Terror because it means giving up the hope that's kept me trying for 15 years, accepting that the father-daughter relationship I wanted is never going to exist. Brooks writes something in her notebook and tells me that hope isn't always healthy when it keeps us accepting harm. She says sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is grieve what we'll never have, so we can build something different with what's actually possible. I leave her office feeling wrung out and somehow lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy I didn't know I could put down. That evening, Tom calls while I'm heating up one of Luna's frozen meals. His voice sounds careful when he says Harold has been asking him to set up a meeting, claiming he wants to apologize and explain himself. Tom asks what I want him to say, and I stare at my dinner spinning in the microwave while I think. I tell Tom I'm not ready to see Harold yet, that being in the same room with him right now feels impossible. But I say I'm willing to read a letter if Dad wants to write one, something where he has time to think about what he wants to say instead of just reacting. Tom agrees to pass that along, but warns me that Dad isn't great at expressing emotions in writing or any other format. I can hear the doubt in Tom's voice, like he's already preparing me for disappointment. 4 days later, Tom shows up at my apartment with an envelope in his hand, and skepticism all over his face. He hands it to me without saying anything, and I can tell from how he's standing that he's already read it, or at least knows what's inside. I open the envelope and pull out a single page, Harold's handwriting cramped and uneven like he doesn't write by hand much anymore. The letter is short and awkward, 3 paragraphs that start with him acknowledging he handled things poorly. He writes that he never meant to hurt me so badly, that seeing me collapse scared him and made him realize he's been too hard on me. He says he knows he should have done better. I read it twice looking for something more, some real acknowledgement of the 15 years, but it's not there. The letter focuses on his fear when I collapsed, his pain about the divorce, his struggle with seeing my mother's face every time he looks at me. Everything centers on his feelings, his experience, his hurt. There's no real apology for excluding me from the party, or for the lifetime of rejection that led to my body shutting down in his kitchen. I put the letter on my coffee table and Tom sits next to me waiting. The letter feels inadequate and defensive, like he's trying to explain away his behavior instead of taking responsibility for it. Tom says he told Harold the letter needed to be better, but Dad insisted on sending it anyway. I take the letter to Dr. Brooks at my next session, and she reads it carefully, her pen hovering over certain phrases. She points out all the ways Harold minimizes his behavior, how he says he was too hard on me instead of acknowledging he was rejected me, how he focuses on his fear about my collapse instead of the harm that caused it. Brooks asks me what I needed to hear that wasn't in the letter, and I realize I needed him to say he was wrong, not just that he handled things poorly. I needed him to say I didn't deserve his rejection, that it wasn't my fault I look like my mother, that he robbed us both of a father-daughter relationship because of his own unresolved pain. Brooks suggests I write a response letter saying exactly what I need, whether I send it or not. She says sometimes writing what we wish we could say helps us understand what we're actually asking for. Writing my response letter takes 3 days and multiple drafts scattered across my kitchen table. The first version is too nice, still trying to protect Harold's feelings and make him feel better about being a terrible father. I throw it away and start over. The second version is all anger, pages of rage about every time he looked through me like I didn't exist, but it doesn't feel quite right either. The third draft starts getting closer to honest. I write about being 12 years old and losing both parents even though he was still alive, about watching him celebrate Tom, while barely acknowledging my existence, about the birthday party being the final proof that I would never be enough no matter what I did. I write that I deserved a father who could separate me from his ex-wife, and his failure to do that is his responsibility, not mine. I write that his pain doesn't excuse the damage he caused, that I was a child who needed him, and he chose his grief over his daughter. By the fourth draft, I'm crying, but the words feel true, less concerned with protecting him, and more focused on saying what actually happened. I print it out and read it 3 times before sealing it in an envelope. Tom comes over to pick up the letter, and I ask him to read it first. He sits on my couch, and I watch his face change as he goes through it, his eyes getting wet halfway down the first page. When he finishes, he puts the letter down carefully and admits he never fully understood how bad it was for me. He says he knew Dad was harder on me, but he didn't realize it felt like complete rejection, because from his perspective, Dad was still there at family dinners and holidays. I explain that physical presence without emotional connection is sometimes worse than absence, because it's a constant reminder of what you're not receiving. Tom wipes his eyes and says he's sorry for all the times he didn't speak up, for taking the easy path of being the favorite instead of questioning why there had to be a favorite at all. He folds the letter back into the envelope and promises to deliver it. I tell Tom to make clear to Harold that I don't want an immediate response, that I need him to actually sit with what I've written instead of just reacting defensively. Tom agrees and says he's going to have his own conversation with Dad about the favoritism and how it damaged both of us, even if Tom was the preferred child. He admits he's been reading about family dynamics since my collapse, and realizes he benefited from the same system that harmed me, which makes him complicit, even though he didn't create it. Tom leaves with my letter, and I feel both relieved to have said everything and terrified about what happens next. 3 days later, Tom calls to tell me Harold wants to respond to my letter. I'm at work when he calls, and I step outside to take it because I need air for this conversation. Tom says he told Harold I need more time before any direct communication, that a response letter is fine, but nothing more yet. Tom's voice gets quieter when he describes Harold's reaction to reading my letter. Apparently, Dad broke down crying, told Tom he never understood how deeply he'd hurt me, and he doesn't know how to fix it. Harold kept saying he thought I knew he still cared even if he couldn't show it, that he assumed I understood his coldness was about my mother and not about me. Tom reports all this without sugarcoating it, then adds that Dad's tears don't erase 15 years of damage, and crying is the bare minimum response to realizing you've emotionally abandoned your child. I thank Tom for being honest and for backing up my boundaries with Harold. After we hang up, I sit in my car in the work parking lot thinking about Harold crying over my letter, wondering if his tears mean anything or if they're just another way of making this about his pain instead of the harm he caused. I need to see Gail. She texts me the next day asking if I can meet for lunch at the diner near her hotel. I drive there with my hands shaking on the wheel, not sure what she's going to say, but needing to hear it. She's already at a booth when I arrive, looking smaller than usual in her travel clothes. She stands up and hugs me tight, longer than she usually does, and I feel something break loose in my chest. We sit down and order coffee, and she doesn't waste time getting to it. She tells me she's been calling Harold every day since the party, having conversations she should have had years ago. He keeps trying to talk about how much pain he's in from the divorce, how seeing me brings it all back. Gail says she cuts him off every single time and tells him to focus on my pain instead, the pain of being rejected by my own father for 15 years. Harold doesn't like it when she does this. He gets defensive and says she doesn't understand what it was like when my mother left. Gail tells me she's been saying the same thing back to him over and over. She understands exactly what it was like because she watched it happen, but that doesn't excuse what he did to me. She says Harold starts crying during these calls, asking why everyone is suddenly against him. Gail tells him nobody is against him. They're just finally being honest about what they've watched him do to his daughter. She admits to me that she's angry at herself for staying quiet all these years, for thinking that giving him space and time would somehow fix things on their own. She says she enabled his behavior by not calling it out, by showing up to family events and pretending everything was normal when it wasn't. I ask her why she's doing this now, and she looks at me with wet eyes. She says watching me collapse in his kitchen scared her into realizing that silence makes you part of the problem. She tells me she's committed to holding Harold accountable even if it damages their relationship, because she'd rather lose her son than watch him destroy his daughter any longer. The next week, I have my regular therapy session with Dr. Brooks. I tell her about Harold's first letter and how inadequate it felt, how it focused on his feelings instead of the harm he caused. Dr. Brooks asks me what real accountability would look like coming from Harold, what I would need to see beyond apologies and tears. I realize I don't actually know because I've never thought about it in concrete terms. I've just been hoping he would magically become the father I needed without really defining what that meant. Dr. Brooks pulls out a notepad and we start making a list together. I need to see change behavior over time, not just emotional reactions when he gets confronted. I need him to stop making comments about how I look like my mother, to never compare me to Tom in ways that make me feel less than. I need him to acknowledge birthdays and holidays and important events without me having to beg for basic recognition. Dr. Brooks writes all this down and then adds more things I hadn't thought of. She says I need to see him take responsibility for specific incidents from my childhood, to name them out loud and admit they were wrong. I need him to do his own therapy work on his unresolved grief instead of making me carry the weight of his pain. I need him to demonstrate consistent effort for months, not just weeks, before I should consider letting him back into my life in any real way. She looks at me seriously and says, Harold may not be capable of meeting these requirements. Some people aren't willing or able to do the deep work required to change patterns that have lasted 15 years. She tells me I need to prepare for the possibility that Harold will try for a while and then give up when it gets too hard, or that he'll meet some requirements but not others. Dr. Brooks says the most important thing is that I'm clear about my boundaries, and I stick to them even if it means accepting that a relationship with my father might not be possible. Luna comes over that weekend to help me turn these therapy insights into an actual document. We sit at my kitchen table with her laptop and start drafting a list of boundaries and requirements for any future relationship with Harold. Luna is good at this, at taking my messy thoughts and turning them into clear statements that don't leave room for misinterpretation. We write that Harold must attend therapy with a counselor who specializes in grief and family problems, and he needs to stick with it for at least 6 months before I'll consider any regular contact. We list specific incidents from my childhood that he needs to acknowledge and apologize for, like missing my high school writing award ceremony and barely speaking to me at my college graduation. We write that he needs to make genuine effort to see me as my own person separate from my mother, which means no more comments about my appearance or mannerisms that connect me to her. Luna suggests adding a requirement about how he treats me in front of other family members, because private apologies don't mean much if he's still cold to me at family gatherings. We include that he needs to acknowledge special occasions like birthdays and holidays, without me having to remind him or beg for inclusion. The list ends up being 2 full pages of specific, clear requirements. Luna reads through it one more time and says something that surprises me. She points out that I'm not asking for perfection or demanding that he become a completely different person overnight. I'm just asking for basic respect and genuine effort to repair what he broke. She says if Harold can't meet these requirements, then he doesn't deserve to be in my life, and that's his loss, not mine. I give the list to Tom and ask him to deliver it to Harold. Tom reads through it carefully, nodding at different points, and then folds it up and puts it in his jacket pocket. He drives to Harold's house that evening, and I wait at home feeling sick with nerves. Tom calls me 2 hours later to report how it went. He says Harold read through the entire list twice without saying anything, just sitting there at his kitchen table with this overwhelmed look on his face. When he finally spoke, he asked Tom if the requirements were negotiable. Tom told him no, that these are the bare minimum for me to even consider having a relationship with him. Harold asked if there was anything he could do right away to prove he's serious about changing. Tom says he told Harold the best thing he could do immediately is start looking for a therapist and stop making this about his timeline for fixing things. Tom backed up every single point on my list, telling Harold that if he can't meet these basic requirements, then he doesn't deserve to have me in his life. Harold got defensive at one point, saying some of the requirements seemed harsh. Tom shut that down fast, telling Harold that 15 years of rejection is harsh, and my list is just asking for basic human decency. Harold didn't argue after that. Tom says he left the list on the kitchen table and told Harold to really think about whether he's willing and able to do this work, because I'm not going to accept half measures or temporary effort. Tom tells me he's proud of me for being so clear about what I need, and he promises to keep backing me up with Harold no matter how uncomfortable it gets. 2 weeks after my collapse, I go back to work. My manager knows a basic version of what happened, that I had a medical emergency related to family stress. She tells me to take things at my own pace and to let her know if I need any accommodations. My coworkers who know me well notice something different about me right away. I'm more guarded than I used to be, less willing to just go along with things to keep the peace. But I'm also more grounded somehow, like I've stopped floating and finally landed somewhere solid. I tell a few people a simple version of the story, that I had a falling out with my father and it got bad enough that I ended up in the hospital. They're supportive without being nosy, which I appreciate. Having work to focus on helps me feel less consumed by the family stuff. There's something normal and steady about sitting at my desk and working through my task list, solving problems that have clear solutions. I'm grateful for the routine, for having somewhere to go where people expect me to be competent and professional instead of broken and dramatic. My manager pulls me aside after my first week back and says she's noticed I seem different, but in a good way. She says I'm setting better boundaries with difficult clients and I'm not letting people walk over me like I used to. I realize she's right. Something shifted when I finally stood up to Harold. I stopped being willing to accept scraps of respect from anyone. Celine texts me during my second week back at work. She says Harold has been calling different family members asking for therapist recommendations, which surprises everyone because he's never been the type to admit he needs help. She tells me the family is watching closely to see if he actually follows through, or if this is just a temporary reaction to being confronted. Celine adds that several relatives have been calling Harold directly to tell him his treatment of me was wrong. Our aunt apparently had a long conversation with him where she told him she's ashamed of how he's acted toward me all these years. Our uncle said something similar, telling Harold that excluding me from the birthday party was cruel, and everyone there felt uncomfortable about it. Celine says there's a family consensus forming that Harold needs to make serious changes if he wants to repair these relationships. It's not just about me anymore. People are realizing they've been complicit by staying silent, and they're speaking up now even though it's uncomfortable. Celine tells me she's sorry for not saying something sooner, for posting that party invitation without thinking about how it would hurt me to see it. I tell her I'm not mad at her. The invitation wasn't the problem. Harold's decision to exclude me was the problem, and the invitation just made it visible to everyone else. 3 weeks after I gave Harold my list of requirements, Tom tells me Harold has started therapy. He found a counselor who works with grief and family problems, and he's been going to weekly appointments. Tom says Harold talks about the sessions sometimes, admitting they're harder than he expected. The therapist is making him look at things he's been avoiding for 15 years, helping him understand how much of his anger at my mother got transferred onto me. Harold told Tom he's starting to realize he never actually dealt with the divorce. He just buried all his feelings and let them turn into this permanent wall between us. Tom is carefully hopeful about this, but he's also realistic. He reminds me that 3 weeks of therapy doesn't undo 15 years of damage. We need to see if Harold can keep this up long term, if he's really willing to do the deep work, or if he'll quit when it gets too uncomfortable. Tom says he's checking in with Harold regularly, asking how therapy is going and whether he's doing the homework his counselor assigns. So far, Harold is showing up consistently, which is more than Tom expected. But we both know consistency for a few weeks is different from consistency for months or years. I tell Tom I appreciate him keeping track of this stuff so I don't have to be in direct contact with Harold yet. Tom says he's glad to do it, that it's the least he can do after all the years he stayed quiet about the favoritism. My sessions with Dr. Brooks shift focus around this same time. She tells me we need to work on my own healing separate from whether Harold changes or not. I can't make my mental health dependent on his willingness to do therapy or meet my requirements. We start doing exercises where I practice being kind to myself, where I challenge the belief that I'm somehow responsible for earning basic parental love. Dr. Brooks has me write letters to my younger self, the 12-year-old who lost her mother and then lost her father even though he was still alive. She has me imagine what I would say to that kid if I could go back in time. I write things like, "You didn't do anything wrong and his rejection isn't about you and you deserve better than this." Reading these letters out loud in therapy makes me cry every time, but it also helps something shift inside me. I'm starting to understand on a deeper level that Harold's rejection was never about my worth as a person. It was always about his inability to deal with his own pain in healthy ways. He chose to make me the target of his unprocessed grief instead of doing the work to heal from my mother's betrayal. That was his choice and his failure, not mine. Dr. Brooks says this understanding is crucial because it means I can stop trying to fix myself into someone Harold can love. I was always lovable. He was just too damaged to see it. Thanksgiving gets closer and I tell Tom I'm not ready to go to any family gathering that includes Harold. The thought of sitting at a table with him pretending everything is fine makes me feel sick. Tom understands, but he admits he's torn about what to do for the holiday. He wants to support me, but he also doesn't want to completely cut off contact with Harold, especially now that Harold is actually trying to change. We decide Tom will do a brief visit with Harold on Thanksgiving, maybe stop by his house for an hour, but then he'll spend the main meal with me and Luna and some friends. Tom makes it clear to Harold that this is the arrangement, that he's splitting his time and Harold needs to accept that. Gail calls me and announces she's spending Thanksgiving with me and my chosen family instead of with Harold. She says she's sending him a clear message about where her priorities are this year. Harold apparently got upset when she told him, saying it feels like everyone is abandoning him. Gail told him that's what it feels like to face consequences for your actions, and maybe now he can understand a fraction of what he put me through. I'm grateful to have Gail and Tom and Luna all choosing to spend the holiday with me. It makes me feel less alone, less like I'm the problem that everyone has to work around. Thanksgiving ends up being one of the best holidays I've had in years. Luna hosts at her apartment, and we invite a few other friends who don't have family nearby. Tom and Gail come over after Tom's brief visit with Harold. We cook together, making too much food and laughing about our terrible cooking skills. Someone suggests we go around the table and share what we're grateful for, which usually feels cheesy, but this year it hits different. When it's my turn, I find myself saying I'm grateful for the collapse. Everyone looks surprised, but I explain that passing out in Harold's kitchen forced everything into the open. It made all the dysfunction visible in a way that couldn't be ignored anymore. I'm grateful for the people who showed up for me when I was in the hospital and after, who didn't make excuses for Harold or tell me to just forgive and move on. Luna tears up and squeezes my hand. Tom says he's grateful I'm still here, and that I finally told him how bad things really were. Gail's turn comes and she tells stories about Harold as a child, things I've never heard before. She talks about how sensitive he was, how deeply he felt things, how he used to cry at sad movies. She says somewhere along the way he learned to turn all his feelings into anger, and that's what destroyed his relationship with me. Hearing these stories helps me see Harold as a whole person, flawed and human, instead of just the father who rejected me. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it makes it easier to hold him accountable while letting go of some of my anger. By the end of the night, I feel full in a way that has nothing to do with the food. I feel connected to people who actually see me and choose me, and that's worth more than any relationship based on obligation or guilt. The card shows up in my mailbox the day after Thanksgiving, a plain white envelope with Harold's handwriting on the front. I stand at my mailbox holding it, not sure if I want to open it or throw it away. Luna's inside cleaning up from yesterday, and I could just toss this in the trash and never mention it. But I open it anyway, pulling out a simple card with a turkey on the front and Harold's messy handwriting inside. He writes that he's grateful I'm alive and he's working on himself in therapy, that he has a lot to learn about being a better father. The note is short, maybe 3 sentences total, but it doesn't make excuses or blame me for anything. Tom calls that evening and tells me Harold spent most of Thanksgiving at Gail's house but left early, barely eating anything. Tom says Harold looked uncomfortable the whole time, like he finally understood that his choices have consequences, and nobody was going to pretend everything was fine just to make him feel better. I put the card in a drawer and try not to think about it too much. December starts cold and gray, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside all day. Tom stops by my apartment one Saturday afternoon with coffee and tells me Harold asked his therapist about family therapy. He wants to know if that might help our relationship, if I'd be open to it eventually. I tell Tom I need to see more sustained change from Harold first. 3 weeks of therapy doesn't erase 15 years of rejection. Tom nods and says he gets it, that he told Harold the same thing. I bring it up with Dr. Brooks at my next appointment, and she explains that family therapy can be helpful, but only if both people are genuinely committed to change. She says it shouldn't be used to pressure the hurt person into reconciliation before they're ready, that some therapists will push for forgiveness too soon because it looks like progress. I tell her I'm not ready for that yet, and she says that's completely reasonable. The rest of December becomes about focusing on my own healing, instead of waiting to see what Harold does next. Luna and I start cooking dinner together every Tuesday night, trying new recipes and talking about our weeks. She tells me about her job stress and her dating life, and I tell her about therapy and the slow process of rebuilding my sense of self. Tom comes over more often too, and we have conversations that go deeper than they ever have before. He admits he always knew Harold treated me differently, but he didn't realize how much it hurt, because from his perspective, Harold was still showing up to family events. I explain that physical presence without emotional connection is sometimes worse than complete absence, because it's a constant reminder of what you're not getting. Tom gets quiet and says he should have spoken up years ago, that his silence made him part of the problem. Gail calls me every few days just to check in, asking how I'm doing without making it about Harold. She tells me about her friends in Florida and the book club she joined and what she's learning in her own therapy. I'm discovering what it feels like to have family members who prioritize my well-being without conditions attached. Harold keeps going to therapy every week throughout December, and Tom reports that he seems to be taking it seriously. He's doing homework assignments his therapist gives him and reading books about grief and family trauma. Tom says Harold had a breakthrough session in mid-December where he finally connected his rejection of me to his unprocessed rage at my mother. The therapist apparently helped him see that he's been punishing me for her choices, using me as a stand-in for his ex-wife instead of seeing me as my own person. Tom tells me Harold cried through most of that session, really sobbing in a way Tom had never seen before. I don't know what to do with this information, whether it changes anything or if it's just Harold finally facing what he should have dealt with 15 years ago. 2 days before Christmas, Harold asks Tom if he can send me a longer letter. I agree to read it but make no promises about responding. The letter arrives on Christmas Eve in a thick envelope that feels heavy in my hands. I wait until I'm alone in my apartment to open it, sitting on my couch with tea I don't drink while I read. The letter is completely different from his first attempt, specific and detailed instead of vague and defensive. Harold writes about the time I won a writing award in high school, and he didn't attend the ceremony because he claimed he had to work, even though Tom's basketball games never conflicted with his schedule. He mentions my college graduation where he barely spoke to me at the celebration, standing on the opposite side of the room while other parents hugged their kids and took pictures. He lists other moments too, small rejections that added up over the years to communicate that I didn't matter to him. Harold acknowledges these weren't isolated incidents, but a pattern of behavior that told me I wasn't worth his time or attention. The letter continues on the second page with Harold taking responsibility for choosing his pain over his daughter. He writes that therapy is helping him see how he made me carry the burden of his unresolved grief, that he turned me into a symbol of his failed marriage instead of letting me be his child. He says he understands if I never want a relationship with him, that he wouldn't blame me for cutting him out of my life completely. But he wants me to know that his rejection was never about me, that I didn't do anything wrong by looking like my mother, or sounding like her, or existing as proof that she once loved him. Harold ends the letter by saying he's committed to continuing therapy regardless of whether I forgive him, that he needs to change for himself, and not just to earn back my presence in his life. I read the letter 3 times, crying through the second and third readings. I take it to my therapy appointment right after Christmas and show it to Dr. Brooks. She reads it carefully and points out the significant differences from his first letter, noting that this one demonstrates genuine accountability without centering his feelings at the expense of mine. She asks me how I feel reading it, and I admit I feel a complicated mix of validation, grief, and cautious hope. The validation comes from Harold finally acknowledging specific ways he failed me, putting words to things I've felt but couldn't always articulate. The grief is for all the years we lost, for the father-daughter relationship we could have had if he'd dealt with his pain in healthy ways. The cautious hope is the scary part, because it means considering that things might actually change. Brooks reminds me that a good letter doesn't obligate me to reconcile, that it's just one piece of evidence I can consider when deciding what kind of relationship I want with Harold going forward. Christmas Day feels peaceful in a way holidays haven't been for years. I spend it with Tom, Luna, and Gail at Tom's apartment, cooking too much food and watching old movies. Nobody mentions Harold until late afternoon when Gail tells me she spent an hour on the phone with him that morning. She says he's genuinely struggling with the reality of what he's lost, that he kept asking if she thought I'd ever forgive him, Gail told him she didn't know and couldn't answer that for me, but she encouraged him to keep doing the work in therapy and to respect my timeline rather than pushing for reconciliation on his schedule. We played board games after dinner and Luna beats everyone at Scrabble, celebrating like she won the lottery. I realize I'm not anxiously trying to earn Harold's attention or bracing for his coldness, that I can just exist and enjoy time with people who actually want me here. Early January brings cold that makes my apartment windows frost over at night. I sit at my kitchen table one Saturday morning and write a response to Harold's letter, working through multiple drafts until I get the tone right. I acknowledge that I can see he's making an effort, and that his accountability means something to me. I write that I'm not ready for direct contact yet, but I'm open to the possibility of rebuilding some kind of relationship if he continues therapy and demonstrates sustained change over the next several months. I'm clear that I won't accept anything less than genuine respect, that comparing me to my mother or making me responsible for his emotions is a deal breaker that will end any attempt at reconciliation permanently. I list specific requirements like consistent therapy attendance, acknowledgement of how his behavior affected me, and willingness to hear my feelings without getting defensive. Tom picks up the letter from my apartment on Sunday and promises to deliver it to Harold that afternoon. He texts me later that evening saying Harold read it multiple times and seemed both relieved and sobered by the conditions I set. Tom says Harold told him he's grateful I'm leaving the door open even a crack, that he understands he has to earn back what he destroyed through years of consistent effort. Harold apparently asked his therapist to help him understand what sustained change actually looks like and how to demonstrate it through actions rather than just words. February comes, and I notice something shifting in my therapy sessions with Dr. Brooks. We sit in her office every week and work through the layers of grief, not just for Harold's rejection, but for the father I never got to have in the first place. She has me do exercises where I imagine what a healthy father-daughter relationship looks like, and then we talk about whether any version of that might be possible with Harold now. I'm learning to hold two truths at the same time without letting either one take over completely. Harold hurt me deeply for 15 years, and he's also making genuine efforts to change now. Both things are real, and I don't have to pick just one to believe. The anger that used to fill my chest every time I thought about him starts to feel less heavy, not because I'm forgiving him exactly, but because I'm building a life that doesn't revolve around earning his love anymore. Dr. Brooks says this is what healing looks like when you stop waiting for someone else to fix what they broke and start building something new for yourself instead. Mid-February brings an email from Harold that Tom forwards to me after checking that I'm okay receiving it. The subject line just says request, and the message is short and careful. He writes that his therapist thinks it might be helpful for us to exchange occasional emails as a low-pressure way to start rebuilding some communication. He says he understands if I'm not ready and he won't push, but he wanted to ask. I stare at the email for 20 minutes before forwarding it to Dr. Brooks and asking what she thinks. We spend most of my next session talking through the pros and cons, and she points out that Harold asking permission instead of just emailing me directly shows some awareness of boundaries. She thinks it's reasonable given the progress he's shown in therapy, but only if I set clear limits about how often and what topics are okay. I send back a response saying I'm willing to try weekly emails with some ground rules. No guilt trips, no comparing me to my mother, and if he breaks these rules even once, I'm done. His reply comes within an hour thanking me and agreeing to everything. Our first real email exchange happens 3 days later, and it's awkward as hell. He writes about his therapy sessions in vague terms and asks how work is going. I give short answers about a project I'm working on and ask about his house repairs. We're like strangers making polite conversation, but at least nobody's crying or yelling. The next 6 weeks bring emails every week or two, and I start noticing changes in how Harold writes to me. He asks about specific things I mentioned before, like he's actually paying attention and remembering details. When I tell him about a difficult client meeting, he asks follow-up questions instead of just moving on to talk about himself. He mentions things his therapist is teaching him about listening and staying curious instead of defensive, and I can see him actually trying to practice it. The emails are still careful and a little stiff, but they feel more real than any conversation we've had in years. Tom tells me that Harold treats these emails like they're precious, reading them multiple times before responding and asking Tom if his replies sound okay. Tom says Harold keeps a folder of all our exchanges and goes back through them when he's having a hard day in therapy. I'm still guarded and watching for signs that he might slip back into old patterns, but part of me is starting to relax just slightly. It feels weird to have regular contact with Harold that doesn't leave me feeling terrible afterward. Late March arrives, and I'm sitting at my desk when an email from Harold pops up with a different tone than usual. He writes that it's been almost 4 months since my collapse, and he knows he has no right to ask for more than I'm already giving. But he wonders if I'd be willing to meet for coffee in a public place with Tom there as a buffer. He says he understands if it's too much and he'll keep working in therapy either way. I stare at the email for 2 days before responding, going back and forth in my head about whether I'm ready. Dr. Brooks and I spend a whole session working through my fears about seeing Harold face to face again. She helps me set clear parameters for the meeting, like keeping it to 1 hour maximum and having a list of topics that are completely off limits. We do role-playing exercises where she pretends to be Harold saying difficult things, and I practice leaving or redirecting the conversation. She reminds me over and over that I can walk out at any moment if I feel disrespected or overwhelmed, that agreeing to coffee doesn't obligate me to anything beyond that 1 hour. Luna makes me promise to text her the second the meeting ends so she knows I'm safe. I finally send Harold an email saying yes to coffee with very specific conditions attached. Saturday morning comes and I drive to a cafe across town that neither of us ever goes to normally. Tom is already there when I arrive, sitting at a corner table and looking almost as nervous as I feel. Harold walks in 5 minutes later and I barely recognize the expression on his face. He looks scared in a way I've never seen before, like he's the one who might get rejected this time. He thanks me for coming before he even sits down, and his voice shakes a little when he says he knows how hard this must be for me. We order coffee and spend the first 10 minutes talking about nothing important, just weather and traffic and safe topics that don't touch anything real. Tom does most of the talking at first, filling the awkward silences and redirecting when things start to feel tense. Harold asks about my work and actually listens to my answer instead of waiting for his turn to talk. He's careful not to push into personal territory or make the conversation about his feelings and progress. 45 minutes pass and I realize I'm not counting the minutes until I can leave anymore. When we're done, Harold asks if I'd be open to doing this again sometime, and I hear myself say, maybe. Not yes, not no, just maybe. It feels like the most honest thing I've said to him in years. Tom calls me that evening and tells me Harold broke down crying after I left, telling Tom the meeting went better than he dared to hope, and he was terrified I'd shut down any possibility of future contact. Tom says Harold's therapist has been working with him on managing his expectations and understanding that rebuilding trust is a process that takes time and patience. Harold apparently keeps saying he knows he doesn't get to decide the pace of reconciliation, that my willingness to even try is a gift he needs to honor instead of taking for granted. I tell Tom I appreciate that Harold seems to understand this, that he's not acting like one coffee meeting fixes 15 years of damage. Tom admits he's surprised by how much Harold has changed in just a few months, that he never thought their father was capable of this kind of self-awareness. April brings more emails and another coffee meeting, this one without Tom because I suggested after the first meeting went okay. Harold and I sit across from each other at the same cafe and talk for over an hour this time. He shares more about what he's learning in therapy, how his own father was cold and distant, and he never learned healthy ways to process pain. He tells me about realizing in a session that he's been using me as a stand-in for my mother, punishing me for her choices because he couldn't reach her anymore. I listen, but I also share some of my own therapy work about rebuilding self-worth after years of feeling like I had to earn basic love. The conversation feels different from anything we've had before, more like two adults trying to understand each other instead of a desperate daughter begging for scraps. When we leave, Harold doesn't ask about next time, and I appreciate that he's learning to let me set the pace. Gail calls me a few days later and says she's proud of how I'm handling everything with Harold. She tells me I'm maintaining boundaries while staying open to possibility, not sacrificing my well-being just to make things easier for him. Gail says Harold has changed noticeably over the past few months in ways she didn't think were possible. He takes more responsibility for his emotions instead of blaming everyone else, and he's willing to sit with discomfort rather than lashing out to make it stop. She's careful to say he still has a long way to go, and setbacks are likely, but the direction of change feels genuine. Gail admits she didn't believe Harold was capable of this level of growth when this all started, and watching him actually do the work has been both surprising and encouraging. Early May brings Tom's birthday and an email from Harold asking if I'd be comfortable attending a small family dinner to celebrate. Just Tom, Harold, Gail, and me. I think about it for a day before responding that I'll come, but if I feel uncomfortable, I can leave without explanation or guilt. Tom picks me up and we drive to Harold's house together, and I haven't been inside since the day I collapsed. The dinner is awkward, but not terrible. Harold makes an effort to include me in conversation and asks about my life with what feels like genuine interest. We're talking about Tom's new project at work when Harold starts to tell a story from when Tom and I were kids, something about Tom winning a baseball game. Halfway through the story, Harold catches himself because the memory highlights how he celebrated Tom's wins, but barely noticed mine. He stops mid-sentence and apologizes immediately instead of trying to push through or get defensive. The self-awareness feels like real progress, like he's actually learning to catch his old patterns before they hurt me again. After dinner, Harold asks if he can give me something and disappears into his office. He comes back with a photo album. Not one of the old family albums, but something he put together himself. He hands it to me and tells me to look through it when I'm ready. Inside are photos from my childhood that I've never seen before. Me at my 8th grade graduation, at a piano recital when I was 10, reading on the porch one summer afternoon. Pictures he took but never shared with me, moments he captured but couldn't show me he was paying attention. Some part of him was watching even when he couldn't be present in the ways I needed. Harold tells me he's been going through old photos in therapy, working on separating his memories of me from his memories of my mother. His therapist has him look at pictures of me at different ages and talk about what he sees, trying to see me as my own person instead of just a reminder of his ex-wife. The album feels like a peace offering and an acknowledgement of everything we lost. I take it home and cry looking through the photos, seeing evidence of a father who was there but couldn't show up, who loved me but couldn't say it, who kept pieces of my childhood even while pushing me away. I bring the photo album to my next session with Dr. Brooks and set it on the small table between us. She picks it up carefully, like it might break, and starts turning pages while I explain what Harold told me about going through old photos in therapy. Dr. Brooks pauses on a picture of me at my piano recital, 10 years old in a blue dress I'd forgotten about. She asks how it feels to see these moments Harold captured but never shared. I tell her it's complicated because part of me is grateful he kept them, but another part is angry that he was paying attention all along and still chose to reject me. Dr. Brooks nods and says both feelings can be true at the same time. She helps me understand that Harold's inability to share these moments in real time was part of the damage he caused, but his preservation of them suggests some part of him always knew he was making a mistake. We spend the rest of the session talking about how I can acknowledge his current efforts while still honoring the grief of what I missed during those 15 years. Dr. Brooks explains that healing doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen or acting like everything is fine now. It means integrating the past into a more complex understanding of who Harold is and what kind of relationship might be possible going forward. She asks me what I want from Harold now, and I realize I don't want the father I needed as a child anymore because that's impossible. What I want is a father who can be present now, who can acknowledge what he did wrong, and who can respect my boundaries without making me responsible for his feelings. By late May, Harold and I have settled into a pattern of weekly emails and monthly coffee meetings. We're not close and probably never will be, but there's a foundation of respect being built that didn't exist before. Harold continues therapy consistently, and occasionally shares insights that show he's doing deep work on his issues rather than surface-level fixes. He tells me his therapist has him writing letters he never sends, working through his rage at my mother so he can separate those feelings from his relationship with me. I'm cautiously hopeful that we might be able to build something that looks like a healthy father-daughter relationship, even if it will never make up for what we lost. Tom calls me one evening and says he's never seen Dad this committed to personal growth. Tom admits he didn't think Harold was capable of real change, but watching him show up to therapy every week and actually do the homework assignments has been surprising. Gail tells me during one of our phone calls that she's impressed by Harold's sustained effort. She says she's been watching for signs that he's just performing change to get me back, but she thinks the work he's doing is genuine. Gail reminds me that genuine doesn't mean perfect, and Harold will probably have setbacks, but the direction of change feels real. The first week of June brings warm weather and an email from Harold asking if we can meet for coffee. I agree, and we sit at the same cafe we've been using for these meetings. Harold looks nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup before he starts talking. He tells me he's been thinking a lot about what I need from him going forward. I take a breath and tell him directly that while I appreciate his efforts, and I'm willing to continue building a relationship, I need him to understand that some damage can't be fully repaired. I explain that there will always be grief for the father I needed during my childhood and during my teenage years, and his current changes don't erase those years of rejection. Harold listens without getting defensive, which feels like progress. He tells me he understands and acknowledges that he has to live with the consequences of his choices, even as he works to do better now. He says his therapist helped him see that he can't undo the past, but he can choose how he shows up in the present. The conversation feels like a turning point where we're both accepting reality rather than trying to force some fairy tale ending where everything magically becomes perfect. 3 months after that first coffee meeting, I can honestly say my relationship with Harold is better than it's been in 15 years. It's also completely different from what I once hoped for when I was younger, and still believed he might wake up one day and see me instead of my mother. We have regular contact based on mutual respect rather than my desperate attempts to earn his love. I've stopped waiting for him to become the father I needed as a child, because that father doesn't exist and never will. Harold continues therapy and makes genuine efforts to be present in my life now, asking about my work and remembering details I share with him. I'm still cautious and protective of my boundaries, watching for signs he might slip back into old patterns. But I'm also grateful for the progress we've made, even if it's imperfect and incomplete. Luna, Tom, Gail, and Dr. Brooks have all celebrated this cautious success with me while reminding me that healing is ongoing, and I deserve to be proud of how I've stood up for myself throughout this entire process. Life isn't perfect, and our family will never be what it could have been if Harold had done this work 15 years ago. But I'm learning that accepting imperfect progress is sometimes the most realistic form of hope, and maybe that's enough for now.